Hello, Dr. Childress here. Welcome. This is my foundation series where I'm applying the information sets from family systems therapy to attachment-related pathologies surrounding divorce. Now, with Bowenian family therapy that we just covered, I showed you diagrams for the diverting child anger, the spousal anger, diverting that anger through the child and creating the conflict with the other parent in the cross-generational coalition, as well as the triangle patterns and as a unit of analysis. We're moving now into structural family systems therapy, which is Salvador Minuchin. And Minuchin is probably the most influential of all the family systems therapists. Most therapists will work from a structural family systems model of Salvador Minuchin. There will be the second primary school is Bowenian. There's only a few that work from a strategic family systems therapy perspective because it's complicated and difficult. Very powerful, but complicated and difficult. So Salvador Minuchin and structural family therapy is the primary family systems model out there. And this is the basic book on that, Minuchin Families and Family Therapy from 1974. And in Minuchin's description, he provides a description of the cross-generational coalition that occurs within the family and provides a nice structural diagrams for what that is. And in fact, in the family systems book, family healing book, he actually gives a specific diagram for that. In addition to the structural school, there is a strategic school of Jay Haley and his wife, Chloe Madonis. And they developed, so you see advances in the practice of strategic family therapy that looks at how power is negotiated within the family. And this is another book by Jay Haley in which Jay Haley defines the construct of a cross-generational coalition. So we're going to look at how these therapists, Jay Haley, Salvador Minuchin, define and describe the pathology. So with Salvador Minuchin, he does these structural diagrams for the family. That's why they call it structural family therapy. So here you can see just very basic structural diagram. So you see the father and the mother there and the cutoff in their relationship, and then they're triangulating the daughter over here. And so that's this picture right here. So the father and mother, there's cut off in their relationship, and they're triangulating the daughter in. And then over here, what it's becoming is the father and mother develop a coalition against the daughter. So in that case, that's a parent-parent coalition against the child. The child becomes what's called an identified patient. So the child develops symptoms to divert parental focus off of that. Here's another structural diagram that you'll be interested in seeing. So this is a structural diagram of the cross-generational coalition. And so you see a mother and a son in a coalition against the father. And you see those dotted line between the mother and the son there? That means a diffuse relationship. And you'll see something very characteristic about a cross-generational coalition is that the mother and the son coalition elevates the son in the hierarchy. So you'll see how the son is, over here, the son is above the father here in a position where the son feels entitled to judge the father. That inverted hierarchy is very characteristic of a cross-generational coalition. So over here you see a more healthier family where the father and mother are on the same line above. And so they're in the executive leadership position, it's called, and the child is down below. And in this one, he's talking about the husband-wife roles as well as the father-mother roles in that diagram. So he provides these diagrams for families and family relationships. And you can see here, he's got a whole system of diagramming things. So what you want to notice up here is the boundaries. So that you got a clear A clear boundary is the dashed line. Diffuse boundary is a dotted line. Rigid boundary is a straight line. Then we have affiliation, over involvement. That's the enmeshed relationship, those three lines. Then conflict, Then the coalition, that bracket there is a coalition. That's the pathology we're talking about. And detouring, which is detouring spousal anger through the child in the coalition to the other parent. So he's got all these diagrams. And before I leave this, I just want to notice the upper one is the executive subsystem, and then you have the sibling subsystem down below. And so for Minuchin, the hierarchy is important. The parents need to be in the executive subsystem. The child needs to be in the child subsystem. When you get a cross-generational coalition, the child crosses those boundaries, and that's deeply disturbing. We never want to see a child crossing boundaries. And just here's another diagram about boundaries. And so, whoops, you can see there they go from disengaged boundaries on one side through normal range and clear boundaries over to the enmeshed diffuse boundaries on the other side. So that's the spectrum of boundaries and how boundaries are navigated in the family. So here we see mother and father diverting their conflict onto the child, and the mother and the child form a coalition with a diffuse boundary against the father. So this would be a diagram of the pathology that's occurring in these families, is a parent and a child in a coalition against the other parent with a diffuse boundary in the parent-child relationship. And so right down here, let me read what the description that Minuchin provides for this. He says, an inappropriately rigid cross-generational subsystem of mother and son versus father appears, and the boundary around this coalition of mother and son excludes the father. A cross-generational dysfunctional transactional pattern has developed. So that's out of Minuchin on page 62 and 64. Later on in the book, he returns to this family and discusses it some more and talks about the symptom features of this family. So over here, we see another diagram of that coalition with father and son, or father and adolescent now against the mother, and the diffuse boundary in that. Okay, so let's see, so up on 101, okay, page 100 and 101, he's talking about a family here where the mother and the children have formed a cross-generational coalition against the father. So you see the bracket there, that's the coalition of the mother and the children, and they have a diffuse boundary between them, so kind of an enmeshed relationship, a diffuse boundary. And you can see what they're working towards here is the therapist wants to join the mother and father and bring them back up to the executive leadership position and get the children back in their proper role. So get the children out of this elevated hierarchy and get them back to the proper hierarchy status, and get the father out of the child position and get the father back up to. And so you can see that in the diagram there, and then how he goes about doing that. And then he talks about that family, cross-generational coalition. So in this he says, the parents were divorced 6 months earlier. The father is now living alone. 2 of the children, who were very attached to their father, now refuse any contact with him. The younger children visit their father, but express great unhappiness with the situation. So that's on page 100 and 101, mostly it's over here on page 101, where he talks about the nature of the pathology. So that is a description of what everybody's talking about, the child rejecting a parent, and you got kids rejecting a parent, and the younger kids are unhappy with the situation, but they were all bonded before the divorce. So that's the nature of the pathology described by Minuchin. And here in his family healing book on page 42, he provides an actual picture of the pathology. So here we have mother and son, enmeshed relationship. You can see the inverted hierarchy there, and the rigid coalition. You can see the rigid boundary there. It's not permeable. It's not a dashed line. It's a solid line. So the mother and son against the father in the inverted hierarchy. And down here you just absolutely, it's really clear, the triangle pattern. Here we have the father and the son against the mother, and you can, that sentence there, the coalition of father and son against the mother appeared as father and son against a mother, meshed relationship. And you see those little lines there? That's the cutoff. That's the emotional cutoff. That's the rejection everybody's talking about. So on page 42 of the book Family Healing, Salvador Minuchin provides a diagram for the pathology of the child's triangulation into the spousal conflict through the formation of a cross-generational coalition with one parent against the other parent, resulting in an emotional cutoff in the child's relationship to the targeted parent. So this pathology is absolutely described in the family systems literature. Now, Jay Haley, over on Strategic Family Systems Therapy, worked with Salvador Minuchin. He and Chloe Madonis and Salvador Minuchin all worked in developing family systems therapy. They took slightly different emphasis on how they describe things. Now, Jay Haley provides a definition for the pathology in this interactionist view. And you'll see the little section he calls it a perverse triangle, and we'll talk about that in just a second. The perverse triangle is crossing generational boundaries. So here's what the definition that Jay Haley provides for the perverse triangle of a cross-generational coalition. The people responding to each other in the triangle are not peers, but one of them is of a different generation from the other two. In the process of their interaction together, the person of one generation forms a coalition with the person of the other generation against his peer. By coalition is meant a process of joint action which is against the third person. The coalition between the two persons is denied. That is, there is a certain behavior which indicates a coalition, which, when it is queried, will be denied as a coalition. In essence, the perverse triangle is one in which the separation between generations is breached in a covert way. When this occurs as a repetitive pattern, the system will be pathological. So that's Jay Haley. Now, one of the things that's important in that discussion is his calling it a perverse triangle. And I want to explain that a little bit. So follow me over to the next video section and we'll talk about cross-generational coalition and the perverse triangle.